The community hall was already half full when she walked in that evening. It was a small event, nothing grand, just something the neighborhood held every few months. People from around the area came to watch local performers' kids showing their talents, adults trying new hobbies, and sometimes even older folks who wanted to relive memories of their younger days. The hall smelled faintly of popcorn, and the wooden chairs creaked every time someone sat down or shifted. It wasn't a fancy place, but it had a warm, friendly atmosphere that made people feel comfortable the moment they stepped inside. She had only come to support a friend who had been practicing all week for the event. She never planned to go on stage or draw attention to herself. She chose a quiet corner seat near the back, where she could quietly clap, watch the performances, and enjoy the evening like everyone else. She wasn't dressed like someone who planned to perform either. She looked simple, almost invisible among the excited crowd. Her posture showed she wasn't looking to be in the spotlight. She just wanted to blend in, observe, and cheer for others. On stage, the host was trying to keep the energy high between performances. He was a cheerful man who loved getting the audience involved. Sometimes when there was a small gap between performers, he would encourage the crowd to take part in fun activities. This time, the gap was longer than usual. The next performer hadn't arrived yet, and the host needed something to fill the silence. That was when he walked toward the center of the stage, tapped the microphone, and said with a playful smile, "All right, everyone, while we wait, how about someone from the audience tries the piano? Just for fun. Nothing serious. Even a few notes would brighten the mood." A ripple of laughter spread across the hall. People thought it was a joke. Who would suddenly walk up and play? The piano wasn't a toy. It was a large, polished instrument placed proudly at the front. It belonged to the local center and was usually handled with care. Most people wouldn't dare touch it unless they knew what they were doing. Still, the host continued encouraging the crowd. "Come on, don't be shy. Anyone can try. It doesn't have to be perfect." Her friend, who was sitting beside her, turned immediately and nudged her arm. "You should try," he whispered. "You've played before, right?" She shook her head quickly. "No, not here. Not today." "But it's just for fun," he argued. "No pressure." "What?" But she wasn't convinced. The idea of walking in front of all these people made her heart skip. She didn't want everyone staring at her. She hadn't touched a piano properly in years. She felt rusty, unsure, and unprepared. Even if she still remembered some melodies, she didn't think she could perform in front of a crowd, especially without practice. Meanwhile, the host kept scanning the audience as if searching for a brave soul. A few people lifted their hands halfway, but then changed their minds and lowered them quickly. Some joked with their friends, pointing at each other. Laughter continued to ripple across the hall, but no one truly stood up. Her friend nudged her again, a little harder this time. "At least try. What's the worst that could happen? If you don't want to play much, play just a few notes. Everyone will clap anyway." She looked at him with a small frown. He didn't understand. For him, it was just a harmless suggestion. For her, it felt like stepping into a spotlight she never asked for. She was someone who usually stayed in the background. Even in school, she never volunteered for performances, even though people said she had a talent for music. Her connection with the piano had always been personal, something she did alone, without anyone watching. She glanced at the piano again. The lights above it shone softly, making its dark surface gleam. For a moment, a memory flashed in her mind. She remembered sitting at a piano when she was younger, her hands smaller back then. Her posture different, her heart full of excitement instead of fear. She used to love playing, but life had changed. Responsibilities had come. Time had passed. Somewhere along the way, her love for playing became something she kept hidden, something she forgot to make time for. The host suddenly called out again, this time pointing loosely toward the back rows. "You there?" "Yes, you in the corner. You look like you could give it a try." Her heart jumped. Was he pointing at her? She looked around quickly, hoping someone else would stand up, someone who wanted this moment more. But everyone near her either shook their heads or smiled awkwardly. A few even looked at her, as if encouraging her silently to go. Her friend raised his hand and waved. "She'll do it." She widened her eyes in disbelief and whispered fiercely, What are you doing?" But people around them clapped and cheered lightly, expecting her to rise. She could feel her cheeks warming as all eyes shifted her way. She felt trapped. But not in a harsh way, more like the universe had gently pushed her into a moment she couldn't avoid. Her friend whispered again, his voice softer this time. "Just try. You don't have to impress anyone. Just touch the keys. That's all." She took a slow, steady breath. Her legs felt stiff as she stood up. The sound of her chair scraping against the floor seemed louder than necessary. The walk from the back row to the stage felt long, almost endless. She kept her gaze low, focusing on each step so she wouldn't trip. She could feel the warmth of the lights even before she reached the front. Her palms were sweating, and she hoped no one noticed how nervous she was. When she got to the stage, the host welcomed her with a wide smile. "Thank you for being brave. Take your time. No pressure." She nodded quietly, unable to speak. She didn't want to say something that would expose how terrified she felt. She slowly walked toward the piano. The bench looked so simple, yet sitting on it in front of many people made it feel intimidating. She lowered herself onto the seat, her back straight, but tense. The piano keys sat before her like a small challenge. She placed her hands on them, but her fingers felt stiff. She pressed one key lightly. The sound echoed softly through the hall. People clapped encouragingly, thinking it was the start of something fun. But inside, she felt something deeper. The single note triggered a series of thoughts, memories, emotions, moments she hadn't touched in years. She let her fingers rest there for a few seconds, breathing slowly. She could sense the entire room waiting for her next move. The hall fell silent. Not a single person whispered. Not a chair creaked. It was as if the crowd instinctively understood that a delicate moment was unfolding. She lifted her hands, hovered them above the keys, and tried to remember what it felt like to simply play, not to impress, not to perform, but to connect with the instrument the way she used to. Her heart beat fast, her breath was uneven, but her mind whispered something gentle. Just try. And that was the moment everything began to change. When she placed her hands on the piano keys again, the hall was so quiet she could hear her own breathing. Her fingers trembled slightly, not because of the cold, but because of the heavy silence around her. She had never been on a stage like this before. Even though this wasn't a grand concert or a big event, sitting under the warm lights with so many eyes watching made her feel exposed in a way she wasn't used to. She pressed a key gently, hoping to ease into it. The single note rang out softly. It wasn't perfect, but it echoed nicely through the hall. A few people in the front row smiled kindly, as if silently telling her it was all right, that she didn't need to worry. But she still felt unsure. She wasn't here to prove anything. She wasn't trained for this moment. She had come only to sit quietly with her friend and watch others perform. Yet here she was, on stage with everyone waiting for her to do something, not because they expected greatness, but simply because they hoped she would try. She took a slow breath and pressed another key, then another. It sounded like someone testing the piano, not playing a piece. She felt awkward. She could almost hear her own heartbeat louder than the soft notes she was producing. A few people whispered in the audience, but not in a rude way. They were curious, wondering what she would do next. Some probably thought she would play just a short tune, or maybe stop altogether and walk off. After all, most people who came up to try usually played a few random notes and laughed it off. But for her, it didn't feel like a joke. The piano wasn't something she could take lightly, even if she hadn't played in years. It held something emotional, something meaningful, something that reminded her of a time. When she felt more connected to herself, she shut her eyes for just a moment. It was a small pause, but it made her feel grounded. She remembered sitting at her old piano at home when she was younger, playing every afternoon after school. She remembered how her hands moved with confidence back then, how music felt like a world she could escape into. That world had slowly drifted away as life became busy. But right now, sitting in front of this instrument, she could almost feel that world calling her back. She rested her fingertips on the keys again, this time letting them settle more naturally. She didn't think too much. She didn't force anything. She simply allowed herself to breathe, trust the feeling. Then she started to play. The first few notes were still soft and unsure, like someone walking slowly into a room filled with memories. But as she continued, something inside her shifted. The hesitation in her fingers began to fade. Her touch grew steadier, warmer. Her hands seemed to remember the paths they once traveled. The audience leaned forward without even realizing it. No one expected much from her when she first walked up, but now they sensed something different in the way she played. The quiet hall started filling with a gentle melody, one that carried emotion even in its simplicity. Her shoulders relaxed a little. She didn't look at the crowd. She didn't need to. Her focus stayed on the keys, on the sound, on the feeling she thought she had forgotten, but clearly hadn't lost. Some people in the back rows exchanged glances. They were surprised not because she was playing loudly or showing off, but because the softness in her music felt very real. It didn't sound like someone who had randomly tried the piano. It sounded like someone who had a story behind every note. The host, who was standing at the side of the stage, couldn't help but raise his eyebrows. This wasn't what he expected either. Usually, when someone from the audience stepped up, it was more comedy than music. But now he stood still, watching carefully. Not wanting to interrupt the moment, the melody grew a bit stronger as she moved from one part to the next. Her fingers flowed more smoothly, as if stepping onto a path she thought she'd forgotten. Every note she played seemed to guide her deeper into her own emotions. She didn't think about the people watching her. She didn't think about messing up or hitting the wrong key. She just played, following something deeper within. For a moment, she opened her eyes and saw the piano's polished surface reflecting her movements. She saw her own fingers, moving with a grace she hadn't felt in years. It gave her confidence, not pride, not boldness. Just a quiet strength she hadn't expected. Someone in the front row whispered, "She knows what she's doing," and the person beside them nodded slowly, but she didn't hear any of it. She only heard the music, the soft rise and fall of the notes, the way they blended together like a small, gentle story. She wasn't playing a famous piece. She wasn't showing off complex techniques. She was simply letting her heart speak through the keys, and that's what made the moment special. Her friend at the back watched with wide eyes. When she left their seats, he thought she would play a few notes and return quickly. But now he saw the change in her. He could see how deeply connected she was to the music. Even if she hadn't shown this side in a long time, she reached a part of the melody where the notes were slightly higher. Her fingers moved lightly, almost like they were dancing. The hall remained silent, except for the music. Even the small children who had been restless earlier were now quiet, almost hypnotized by the gentle tune filling the space. She wasn't trying to impress anyone. She wasn't thinking about applause. She wasn't performing for the crowd. She was simply expressing something she had kept inside for too long, every now and then. She hesitated, unsure if she remembered the next part perfectly, but each time her fingers found their way. She trusted instinct more than memory, and somehow that made the music feel even more genuine. People watched as her back straightened slightly, as her shoulders softened, as her face relaxed. She started to look less like someone trying something new and more like someone rediscovering a part of herself. The host stepped back a little to give her space. Sensing this was more than just a casual moment, he didn't want to interrupt or distract her. Even he felt something in the air shifts, something calm, deep and strangely beautiful, as she continued. The melody carried traces of emotions, small waves of sadness, a touch of hope, a feeling of longing. It wasn't dramatic, but it was sincere. And sincerity often touches people more deeply than perfection ever could. Her fingers moved to a slower sequence now, letting the notes fall gently like soft drops of rain. The hall's warm lights created a glow around her, making her look like she belonged on that stage. Even if she never planned to be there, someone in the audience quietly placed their hand over their heart. Another wiped the corner of their eye, surprised by how moved they felt. She didn't notice any of it. Her world had narrowed down to the keys. Beneath her hands and the memories that surfaced with each note, she remembered why she had once loved playing. She remembered how music had once been her comfort. And now, after years of silence, It finally felt alive again. When she reached the last stretch of the melody she had chosen in her mind, she slowed even more. The notes were soft, almost like a whisper. She wanted the moment to last a little longer, but she knew the piece was nearing its end. She drew a deep breath and let the final note ring out, long and gentle. And then she stopped. The hall remained quiet for a second, not because they were unsure, but because they were processing what had just happened. She kept her head low, afraid she had done something wrong, afraid that silence meant disappointment, but she had no idea that the silence was the calm before something much bigger. The soft final note hung in the air longer than she expected. It felt like the whole hall was holding its breath with her. She kept her hands resting gently on the keys, afraid to move too quickly. In her mind, she worried she might have made mistakes. Maybe people were trying to be polite by staying silent. Maybe they didn't know how to react because she wasn't a trained performer. A flicker of doubt passed through her as she stared at her fingers. But the truth was very different. People weren't silent because they were unsure. They were silent because they were stunned. There was something in the way she played that went beyond simple notes. It wasn't loud or dramatic, yet it carried a raw emotion that touched the room more deeply than anyone expected. For a moment, every person in that hall just wanted to sit in the feeling she had created. Then slowly, as if the spell had finished its last moment, someone clapped, then another. And then, like a wave spreading through the hall, everyone joined in. The applause started soft, almost gentle, but it grew louder and warmer until the entire hall was filled with cheering and clapping. She lifted her head slowly, her expression full of surprise. She had truly not expected this. Her cheeks flushed slightly as she tried to give a small smile, but she was still unsure how to react. She wasn't used to praise, especially not from a crowd. She wasn't even sure if she deserved it, but the audience didn't stop. Some people stood up from their chairs, or others leaned forward, their eyes bright. The applause felt real, not forced, not polite, but genuinely touched by what they had just heard. The host hurried back toward the center of the stage, his face showing clear amazement. He wasn't someone who got speechless easily, but at that moment even he struggled to find words. He placed one hand over his heart and shook his head lightly, as if he couldn't believe what had just happened. He leaned slightly toward her and whispered with a smile, "Where did that come from?" She only gave a shy shrug. She didn't know how to explain it anyway. She'd only planned to try to lightly touch the keys and go back to her seat. Hadn't planned a performance. She hadn't chosen a piece. She didn't even think she still had music left in her. Everything that happened had come from a quiet place inside her, a place she didn't even realize she still carried. The applause continued longer than she expected. She stood slowly from the bench, unsure what to do with her hands. She brushed them against her skirt, more out of nervous habit than anything else. She gave a small bow, not too deep, just enough to show respect to the crowd. When the applause softened, the host took the microphone again. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said, still shaking his head in disbelief, "that was supposed to be a simple try, just a few keys. But what we just heard was something else." The audience agreed with a wave of murmurs and nods. He turned to her again. "I think we just discovered someone who's been hiding her talent." She tried to speak, but the words felt stuck. She simply gave another small smile and looked down. She didn't like being the center of attention, but at the same time, something in her heart felt warmer than it had felt in a long time. She stepped away from the piano slowly, feeling the weight of the moment. The warmth of the lights faded as she moved toward the side of the stage. Her legs felt shaky, not from fear, but from the emotional rush of what had just happened. She couldn't believe how much music still lived in her, how easily it came back when she allowed herself to trust her fingers. As she walked down the short steps from the stage, she noticed people watching her not with judgment, but with admiration. Some smiled warmly, others gave her small nods of respect. It was a feeling she didn't expect, one that made her heart beat faster in a different way. Her friend was already waiting for her near the back. His eyes were wide with disbelief. As soon as she reached him, he whispered loudly, "What was that? You didn't tell me you could play like that." She laughed nervously. "I didn't know I could either." "That was unbelievable," he said, still shaking his head. I thought you'd play a few notes and sit down, but you made the whole hall stop breathing. She looked away shyly. I just played something I remembered. No, he corrected softly. You didn't just remember, you felt it. And everyone felt it with you. His words made her chest tighten slightly. She wasn't used to receiving praise. She didn't even know how to accept it properly. She kept thinking maybe people were exaggerating, maybe they were just being kind because she looked nervous. But deep down, she couldn't deny she had felt something while playing something she hadn't felt in years. As they sat down again, the next performer came on stage, but the audience still seemed a little distracted. It wasn't easy for them to switch their attention after such an emotional moment. Even the host took a few seconds before introducing the next act, kept glancing toward her with a mixture of admiration and surprise. A woman sitting nearby leaned over and whispered to her, "That was beautiful. You should perform more often." She smiled gently and thanked her, but she didn't say much else. She wasn't sure if she had the courage to do this again. It had taken everything in her to just sit at that piano. Doing it again on command felt overwhelming, but somewhere inside her, a small spark had awakened, a spark she didn't realize she had missed all these years. As the event continued, people kept turning to look at her from time to time. Some offered soft smiles, others gave quiet nods as if acknowledging her talent again. Her friend nudged her and whispered, "See? I told you. You never lost it." She let out a small breath. "I guess I didn't." But what she didn't say was that she felt something else rising inside her, something deeper than confidence. It was a sense of rediscovery. For years, she had pushed music aside, thinking she had outgrown it or needed to focus on other things. She had convinced herself that it was just a childhood hobby. But playing today showed her it wasn't just a hobby. It was a part of her, a part she had ignored for too long. Her thoughts drifted back to the moment. She closed her eyes on stage and let her fingers move. It hadn't felt like she was performing for others. It had felt like she was speaking in a language she once knew very well, a language that didn't need words, only emotion. A few more performances passed, but she barely noticed them. Was lost in her own thoughts, replaying the melody she had played, wondering how her hands found their way so naturally. She wondered if she could still remember more pieces, or if she could learn new ones again. The idea scared her, but it also excited her. Near the end of the event, the host approached her seat during a break. He bent slightly and whispered politely, "If you're comfortable, I'd love to have you play again at a future event. No pressure. Just think about it." She nodded politely, but didn't commit to anything. She wasn't ready to make promises. She needed time to understand what this meant for her. After the event ended, people slowly began leaving the hall, talking about their favorite moments. But almost everyone mentioned her performance at least once. It had become the quiet highlight of the evening. As she walked outside with her friend, the cool night air hit her face. She took a deep breath, feeling the freshness wrap around her. The sky above was dark but calm, and the sound of distant traffic mixed gently with the laughter of people leaving the hall. Her friend looked at her with a teasing smile. "So, still think you're not good?" She nudged him lightly. "Stop it." "But it's true," he insisted. "You need to play again." She paused, thinking. "Maybe I do," she whispered softly. And in that moment, she realized that something inside her had awakened completely, not because she wanted applause. Not because she wanted praise, but because she wanted to feel that connection with music again. A connection that had lived inside her all along, waiting for the right moment to return. When she stepped out into the cool night air after the event, she felt lighter than she had felt in years. Something inside her had shifted. Her heart was still beating a little fast, but it wasn't from fear anymore. It was from the afterglow of doing something she didn't even know she still had the courage to do. She kept replaying the final note in her mind, the way it had echoed through the hall, the way people had reacted, the way she had felt while playing. It all kept circling through her thoughts like a warm breeze. The path outside the community hall was lined with small lights, and they made the whole place look softer, almost magical. People were still gathered in small groups here and there, talking about the evening, laughing, or saying their goodbyes before heading home. She tried to walk quietly with her friend, hoping no more attention would come her way. But life had different plans. A middle-aged woman walked toward her, smiling warmly. "Excuse me?" she said softly. "I just wanted to tell you, your playing really touched my heart tonight." She felt her cheeks warm again. "Thank you," she replied gently. "That means a lot." The woman nodded. "It wasn't just music. It felt like you were telling a story without words." Before she could respond, another person came over, an older man who had been sitting in the second row. He raised his hand slightly as if greeting a familiar face. "You have a gift," he said sincerely. "Don't hide it. Music like that comes from somewhere deep." She didn't know how to answer. She wasn't sure she deserved such kind words, but she nodded respectfully. "Thank you," she said again, because she didn't know what else to say. As she and her friend continued walking, more people stopped her. Some just wanted to congratulate her. Some wanted to shake her hand, and others simply wanted to tell her how they felt. Each comment surprised her, because she still believed she had only played a simple tune, something small. But to the audience, it had been much more. Her friend leaned close and whispered jokingly, "Ah, I think you just became famous in one night." She laughed softly. "Please don't exaggerate." "I'm not," he argued playfully. "You saw the crowd. They were blown away." She shrugged, still trying to process everything. It felt overwhelming, but in a gentle way, like standing in the middle of a warm breeze instead of a storm. When they finally reached the parking lot, her friend stopped walking. "Before we go," he said, "I want to ask you something." She looked at him curiously. "What is it?" "Why did you stop playing?" he asked, not in a judging way, but in a sincere, caring tone. She lowered her gaze for a moment, thinking. "I don't know," she admitted slowly. "Life changed. I got busy. I stopped believing I was good enough, and then I just didn't pick it up again." He nodded quietly. "But it's still part of you. You could see it in the way you played." She let out a small sigh. "Maybe I forgot that. But tonight reminded you," he said with certainty. She looked up at the sky, which was dark and peaceful. "Yes," she whispered. "Tonight reminded me." They stood there for a moment, letting the silence settle in. It wasn't uncomfortable. It was reflective, calming. As they drove home, the streets passed slowly outside the window. She kept looking out, not really seeing anything but thinking deeply. The performance had unlocked something inside her, something she had buried without realizing its value. She couldn't ignore that anymore. If music made her feel alive, why had she been living without it for so long? When she reached home, she changed into comfortable clothes and sat on her bed for a while. The room was quiet, the kind of quiet that makes you notice your own heartbeat. She thought about the piano, about the sound of the keys, about the way the crowd reacted. Everything replayed in her mind like scenes from a dream. She got up and walked slowly to a small wooden box she kept on a shelf. Inside it were old sheet music, worn with time. Some pages had little pencil notes she had written years ago. She touched them gently, smiling at the memories. She hadn't looked at these sheets in such a long time. It felt like reconnecting with an old friend. She sat on the floor with the papers spread out in front of her. She ran her fingers across the faded ink and thought about how much she had loved playing when she was younger. Back then, the piano wasn't just an instrument. It was her voice, her escape, her comfort. It had been there for her when she didn't know how to express her feelings in words. She whispered to herself. She didn't have an answer, but she knew she didn't want to lose it again. The next morning, she felt a sense of clarity she hadn't felt in a long time. It was gentle, not rushed. She got up, stretched, and went to the small keyboard she kept in a corner of her room. It wasn't a real piano, not like the one at the hall. It was enough to practice on. She touched the keys, feeling the cool plastic under her fingers. It wasn't the same, but it still made her heart flutter. She took a deep breath and began to play the same melody she had performed the night before. It felt different, now less nerve-wracking, more comforting. She played slowly, enjoying every note, letting the music fill the quiet morning air as she played. She realized something important. She didn't want this to be a one-time thing. She wanted music back in her life, not just as a memory, but as something real and active. Something that gave her peace, something that reminded her who she was. Later that day, she got a message from the host of the event. He thanked her again for performing and gently asked if she would consider playing at the next gathering. He didn't pressure her. He simply said the door was always open for her. She smiled at her phone for a long moment. She didn't answer immediately. Not because she didn't want to, but because she wanted to think carefully. She wanted to say yes, but she wanted to say it with confidence, not fear. She spent the rest of the day practicing in short sessions. Each time she played, the melody grew stronger, clearer. Her fingers remembered more than she expected. And the more she played, the more she felt the same warmth she had felt on stage, the warmth of reconnecting with something meaningful. That night, as she lay in bed, she finally texted back, "Thank you for the invitation. I would love to play again." Calm excitement filled her chest. She wasn't agreeing for the applause or the attention. She wasn't agreeing because people encouraged her. She was agreeing because, for the first time in a long time, she wanted to do something purely for herself. A few days later, she returned to the community hall not for a performance, but simply to practice on the real piano. The host let her in early and left her alone in the hall. She sat at the same bench, touched the same keys, and smiled. This time, there was no crowd, no pressure, no expectations. Just her. In the piano, she closed her eyes, placed her hands gently on the keys, and began to play. The sound filled the empty hall, soft and pure. And as the melody rose and fell, she felt something inside her finally settle into place. Not because she played perfectly, but because she had finally allowed herself to return to something she loved, something she thought she had, lost something that had waited quietly for her all along.